Welcome everyone to Inspired by Tag Network Midlands. Today I am joined by Genelle Aldred. Genelle is a broadcaster, an author, a journalist and a very keen golfer. Welcome Genelle.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Genelle, tell us a little bit about your career. For those in the audience who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about what you do.
So at the moment, what I do is I do a lot around communication. So I've written a book about communication. I do communication strategy, and I do some broadcasting around politics and social and cultural things around communication too, and a bit of politics as well. And that's all come from my past as a journalist. So I was a journalist for over 13 years in terms of on screens. I was actually in the Midlands on ITV Central, on BBC Midlands Today, reading the news, doing a bit of weather. And I've also been an online journalist as well, documentary producer at ITN and a newsreader for 5 News and for BBC. No, sorry. Oh, wrong. ITV London news as well. So yes, those are a few of the things that I've done and that I do. So you can sometimes see me on like Sky News or BBC Radio London doing a newspaper review. So yeah, that's what I do. I do a lot of things.
Just a couple of things, just a few things there. Great. So obviously TV is seen as such a glamorous career and so many people want to get into it. How did you get into journalism and broadcasting?
So my master's degree is in broadcast journalism. So I went straight from my degree course. Basically, I went to the BBC on work experience, and then there was a job going, and so they offered it to me. So I'd taken the job. So I'd started just before I finished my degree. So yeah, I was a hard worker, and I went to uni as a mature student. So I kind of understood about the world of work and how to maneuver yourself around, which I think was also really important in a new career space. So it was kind of a smooth transition for me and not too tricky. And then from there, I went on to read the news, and it just built and built from there, really.
And do you think having that little bit of life experience before you went to uni made the difference to your kind of work ethic or not?
No, definitely, because I think when you have never had a quote unquote serious job before and you've got your degree in something, so you know a little bit about the theory, but you don't know about the practical, and you also don't know about the world of work. I think it's a steep learning curve because you're learning how to manage up, you're learning how to maneuver office politics, all of that kind of hierarchy, as well as learning on the job. I just had the learning on the job to do. And so I think that made a big difference. It also made a big difference in how I even approached my work experience, because I approached my work experience as a worker rather than sitting there waiting for people to give me things. I kind of had in my mind, okay, right, I need to be proactive. I need to be saying I want to do this, saying I want to do that. So I think going a little bit older was right for me. And also when I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So work was kind of the thing that was the next thing because I didn't know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think those kind of soft skills that you develop through working beforehand, things like you mentioned, office politics, there's such a huge topic to cover, but do you feel like you developed particular communication skills through those office politics that you were learning?
No, I think I kind of brought them with me. I think probably towards the end of my career, I was bored of the maneuvering, actually, and a bit tired of having to always, do it like this and say it like this, when sometimes you just want to say it plain and just kind of have it said. So I think I definitely brought those skills with me to that career, but I would probably say I learned maybe some of them, like the office politics, before going to uni. But then every sector has different kind of politics, different ways of getting things done, different language, different words that mean different things. So definitely I think in each job you have to evolve into what that sector is, what that workplace culture is, what your team culture is, what your manager's like. But I think the thing that I definitely brought with me was the ability to understand that and to begin to read what was going on. I think that was definitely something that I brought with me.
Yeah, it sounds like being able to read people is your superpower and something that you are particularly skilled at. So could you tell me a little bit about how you do that? What are your top tips for being able to read people and respond to them?
I think one of my top tips is to just understand that sometimes what people are saying is not what they're saying. Often people say lots of things, but sometimes that's not what they mean at all. So maybe that's a better way of saying it. So what people are saying is not often what they mean. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it isn't. And I think it's about getting to understand other people, is understanding when they're saying something that they mean and when they're not. And if they're not, why are they not saying what they mean and what's going on behind it? You know, most of the communication is nonverbal. It's only 7% what people are actually saying, but I think we probably put like 93% weight on what someone said to us rather than all the other things that are going on with their tone, with their body language. And I think one of the hard things that I think you also have to recognize is that culturally, a lot of us are different for whatever reason. That could be ethnicity, it could be sexuality, it could be millions of things why we're communicating the way that we are and why we're reading things the way that we're reading them. And so I think one of the good things to know about reading people is you have to bring a bit of that. There might be something that you might misread. I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make is they say things like, you know, emotional intelligence is like my thing. You understand your emotions. You don't always understand other people's emotions. You think you're seeing this emotion. That might not actually be what you're seeing at all. You can misread anger for fear or fear for anger. And so it's about understanding that you won't always read everything accurately, but it is about getting to know someone, I think it probably sounds a bit Machiavellian, it's not meant to be, but I think you have to understand what people want. What your manager wants is for you to do your job. Like that is what they want. So in service of that, they will say a lot of things to you to make sure that you do it. So you say, I really want to think about other opportunities. Yeah, sure, great. Because that's in service of them getting you to do what they need you to do right now. The trick is to understand, does this person mean this? And sometimes it's not that people don't mean it because of any ill intent, but they just need something now and they just need to kind of do it. But it's about understanding, okay, sometimes people say, well, why would they say that if they didn't mean it? And that's the trick. If you can understand why they said it when they didn't mean it, they didn't want to hurt your feelings, they didn't want to be too harsh, they need to get you through the day, they need to kind of see what you're made of, a million different things. But once you can start to build up that picture yourself of what people need, what people want, what people do, what people say, then you can start to read people. Everyone is not the same, but there are obviously similarities. And I think once you get an understanding, it can kind of help you.
Yeah, no, I love that. And yeah, like you said, it's so hard to put yourself in the position of how someone else is thinking and feeling, and how you show up to work as a leader in particular kind of sets the tone for the rest of the office sometimes, doesn't it? So go on.
No, yes and no. I think we talk a lot about good leadership. We don't often talk a lot about good employees. We really don't. And I think that's the missing link. You can have a brilliant leader. You could have a leader who said it all right. If you've come to work today in the worst mood, it doesn't matter how someone says something to you, you're going to take it the wrong way because you're almost ready to misunderstand. And so I think we need to talk more about good leadership and good team behavior, good employee behavior, because without the two going hand in hand, it just doesn't work. So a great team with a terrible leader is obviously awful, and that impacts a lot more people. But a terrible team, even with a good leader, you will not get anything done. And so I think it's about, how do we all think about how we operate and communicate more freely so that spaces can be more healthy? And that is definitely a two-way street. But if you're in a place where the leader is the worst, well, yeah, that's always hard because they're running things. But there are situations where teams can override a leader if they're strong enough as a team and as a group cohort, where actually leaders can be run out of jobs or effectively also bullied, a strong word, but, you know, kind of pushed out and maybe not listened to, not respected, and all of those things. And so I think it's important in workplace culture that we really start thinking about how that dynamic is working both ways.
Yeah, that's super important. So what are your tips for someone that feels that they might not be being listened to in the workplace and wants to get their voice heard?
I think the first thing in any communication, and I wrote about this in my book, is to look at yourself first. First thing is self-awareness. So I was talking to someone earlier today, and we were talking about, you know, if you're a little guy and you kind of want a meeting with like a big boss, like how do you go about that? Well, the first thing is, you know, I told my manager I just wanted to talk to them and they didn't listen. That's really vague. If you've got 15 things to do when someone says, I want to talk to you, in your mind, you're going to put that in your hierarchy of importance of the day because you don't know what it's about. If someone says to you, look, I'm really feeling isolated in the team, I feel like because of that, my work's suffering, is it okay if we grab 10 minutes? You are much more likely to get a positive response to that than just, I need to talk to you. Because I think the biggest mistake that a lot of people make is that people are somehow reading your mind or intimately acquainted with all the issues that you've got going on yourself. And it's just not the case. And especially when you're busy, or if you're looking after 7 people, if you're looking after 7 people and also doing a job, it is very hard to know what people want unless they're clear. And so I think in that sense, what I would say is just, first of all, that self-awareness. Am I being clear about what I want and the importance of what I want and why I need it and why it's also important for this job? That's the other thing about work. Is it important for the job? You know, there's lots of things that I might want or need that actually don't affect how I do my job at all. I just want or need them. So it's about thinking about all of these things. And then if you think, okay, I am being really clear, but someone's not listening, and that's not, yeah, I think I'm being clear. Like, really think, are you being clear? Are you stating it clearly? Are you asking the right person? Because sometimes you're asking the wrong people for things that they can't actually do. So, you know, am I being clear? Am I asking the right person? And am I choosing my time to ask wisely? You know, if you've waited all day to pluck up the courage when someone's just about to go home, not a good moment. When someone's just stepped in, not a good moment. It's also about picking times and methods. How does that person like to communicate? Do you think it'd be easier if you did it on an email? Do they never answer emails? Okay, don't do an email. Ask them directly. Do you need to go to their PA? Do you need to go to their EA? And I think it's about really thinking about, and then if you've done all of those things and people still aren't listening, well, then, okay, there's an external issue. But the first place I always like to start with is me.
It sounds like you are very strategic with the way you plan your communications. How important is strategy for you in terms of communicating?
I think it's important if you want to get something done. When I'm chatting with my friends or, you know, I just don't put this level of thought into it. I don't send a message and, you know, you just kind of get on with it. But I think when it comes to careers, I think a lot of people have the talent to do things because the job is easy. Most of us can do our jobs. The job is not the tricky thing. It's the people. It's managing those relationships. That's what adds the layers of stress onto a job. So if I just had to go in and read the news today, do it standing on my head. It's not hard, but it's all the dynamics I have to maneuver just to sit in that chair and read the words. So I think a lot of people think, well, I'm talented and I'm just like being overlooked and no one's seeing like all the effort that I'm putting in, or I never get credit or I never get praise. But if you're never thinking about how do I get those things, if you're never observing, how do other people who get those things all the time, like how are they getting them? Because I guarantee you, as much as you think there's some thought going into how they're doing what they're doing. Let's take, for instance, someone who always takes the credit for someone else's ideas. They think about it. They've done it on purpose. You know, you don't take the credit for someone else's idea by accident. You know, you recognize that that's a good idea. And if people think it's my idea, that's a little halo light on me. So it's not that there's no thinking going into anything all the time and it's just thoughtless. So I think that's kind of how I approach it. If there's something that you want to get or an outcome that you want, you have to think about how you're going to get there. It's like I said, talking to the manager. Am I being clear? Am I asking the right person? Am I asking at a good time? Just puts a bit of thought into it. But if you just mindlessly blurt when you're ready, then often that doesn't land in a way that is useful for the other person to receive it. And communication is all about how the other person is receiving it or how you set that up for success.
Yeah, so I imagine when you are reading the news, you're going to have one story that'll be really lighthearted and fun, and then the next moment you'll have to say something really serious and possibly tragic. So how do you use your tone to switch between those two different things to get that message across?
I mean, on TV, I would say TV is a bit like public speaking in that same kind of a way, although it's a bit different because in a TV studio, you can be as dramatic as you want because you need to be, and you know that the TV is going to suck a bit of that drama out. But I think it's, you know, you just kind of something lighthearted and now slow it down and you go into what you kind of want to say, because people then get the tonal shift that something has changed. And sometimes we're like, and next, people get the shift. I'm going up. This story is going up. We're more joyful. We're more hopeful. And when you really want someone to get a point, slow it down. Now, with all of these things, I think that they are all things that can sound over rehearsed and unnatural if you're like trying it out, because if in a normal conversation, a lot of those things wouldn't actually work or wouldn't work in that same way. And actually, in a conversation, most of us would do that naturally in some way, shape, or form. Look, I really need you to understand me. Most people would naturally not go, I really need you to understand me, unless you're angry. But if you were in a thoughtful space, you would really sit down, you'd be like, I've got great news. You can't help but when you say that, you go up. So I think it's about thinking about what are the things that you do naturally. And if you need to make a bigger impression, how do you stretch that a little bit and do it just a little bit more, but not to the point where it's like, you're on Broadway. No, because everyone's going to be like, are you okay? So I think it's about, how do I take what I would naturally do and emphasize it a little bit more so the person I'm talking to gets to understand, especially if you're on Zoom or in a meeting and you need to make that impact. You just need to stretch it a little bit, but not in a way that's inauthentic, because it feels like a performance. It shouldn't feel like a performance, especially if you're in person. It should feel more of you rather than just you at normal pace.
Yeah, and you mentioned there about being on Zoom. Now, since the pandemic, so many people are having to switch to working online. We're doing lots more meetings over the internet, and we're reduced in size to the size of a screen. How do you what are your top tips for making an impact on screen for anyone that wants to sort of influence
I think take up the appropriate amount of space, and that could be more or less. I think we've all been with that colleague who's taking up like a lot of space on a Zoom, and everyone's just like always the same person. But also you don't want to be the person that never speaks, that never takes up any space. I think in Zoom meetings, a lot of people get very distracted by the way they look on camera. If you get distracted, just turn your picture off, like not turn your camera off, but turn your picture off so you can't see it, because then you won't be distracted by it. I think in a meeting, and this is, I think, what threw people, when you're sitting in a meeting around a table, you can't see how you look. You can't see how your face moves. You can't see how your mouth moves when you talk. You can't see any of those things. So you're not bothered by them. But the minute you can see them, they become, oh, I didn't know I looked like that. The joy of kind of having been on telly so much is I know exactly how I look when I talk. I know all about the way that I sound. So for me, being on Zoom is not taxing. So a lot of people say they find Zoom tiring. What they find tiring, in my opinion, is looking at themselves and worrying about themselves. That's actually the tiring thing. Because to me, turning your camera off in a Zoom meeting is the equivalent to sitting under a table in a meeting so that no one looks at you. You wouldn't do it. I think the other things that I would say is tidy up your background, just make it tidy, because that's another thing. You're not going to want to speak up in a meeting if your washing's all behind you. And I get that that is real life, but work is not your life, if that makes sense, because washing behind you is your home life. And even though we're kind of living at work for some people, or, doing those things from home, I think there still needs to be a sense of you are at work now, or you are working now. And what does a good background look like at work? Because if there is something in the background that's, you then look at it and like, oh, that looks terrible. Oh my gosh, now I look terrible. Oh my goodness. You are immediately going to lose a lot of your impact from anything you say, because you're not going to say it with confidence if you say it at all. So I think make your environment right for you to have confidence to speak. And I think some of that is turn off yourself so you can't see yourself, tidy up the background. I'm personally not a fan of those blurred out backgrounds, because I always think, what are they hiding? Why have you got a blurred out background? But I think, if that helps you, use that blurred out background. But I think the most important thing is to remember the camera's not doing anything to you that wouldn't happen in a normal meeting. It's just looking at you, and so are other people, and they would be if you were in person.
That's it. I think, it was quite difficult for a lot of people to understand that actually you do still need to be visible. You do still need your camera on. And if you have it off, it's not going to be as impactful at all. Okay, so moving on a little bit now. You have written a book called Communicating Change. Do you want to tell me a little bit about why you wrote it?
I wrote Communicate for Change because I feel and still feel, and probably feel it more now than ever, that the way that we communicate through disagreement is not effective, and that we are becoming further and further polarized in terms of not just our views, because actually the polarizing of views is actually not the issue. It's the way we discuss those polarized views that I think is the problem. And I wanted to explore, you know, if we're seeking more justice in this world, which is something that I am, how do we do that when the world is full of bias? And so the book is as much about how do I think about how I communicate through my biases, through my lens of life, through the things I want to achieve, with someone else who may have very different views to me or see it differently. And I just wanted to explore how we could do that better, in a sense.
Yeah, it's been such an important thing for people to recognize. I think in terms of recruiting and different sort of workplace things that are going on at the minute, being aware of our own biases has become so important and so prevalent. What do you think is the best way for someone to sort of sit down and think about what their biases are?
I think one of the top ways is to think about the narratives that immediately present themselves to you. So especially if you're a recruiter, let's say, when you see a certain school, what is the story that you are immediately telling yourself about that person based on this singular piece of information? And the reason why that's important is because most people don't decide where they're going to school. Their parents decide. And so that will be down to economics, where they live, like a lot of different things, and says nothing about their capacity to learn or their capacity to be bright or intelligent. That when you see that school name or that university name, you have a story. And it's about interrogating yourself on what is that story. When you see a certain kind of a name, you'll tell yourself a story. What is that story and why is it presenting itself to you in that way? And I think by interrogating the things that you immediately think about, that then helps you to see kind of where your biases are. And think about the things, even in terms of if you're leading a team, if someone tells you something about someone else, working or not, or whatever they come and tell you, you will immediately jump to some kind of conclusion. Not many people go, okay, let me sit back and, like, even if they say, I need to find out more, they will already have a conclusion in their mind or an idea about why it's happening. Look at that narrative. What's it saying to you about the people in your team and the way that you view them? And who do you believe over who you don't believe? And why do you believe them and not believe someone else? So I think it's just continually interrogating the narratives that immediately jump up when you see something about someone or a characteristic.
Yeah, it's super important, isn't it, to sort of question everything and think, why am I thinking this way? What made me think this way? Totally agree. So you mention in your book that nobody ever truly wins an argument. Now, how do you, what's the best way of getting your point across, do you think, in an argument, that's diplomatic and also helps the other person to understand where you're coming from?
So that's from the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I remember when I read that book and I thought, no one wins an argument. This is true. Because if you make someone believe what you believe, often they won't like you for making them climb down. Because in that moment when emotions are high, no one wants to be like, yeah, I'm wrong. Or, you know, yeah, you're right. Like it's just not human nature to be that way. I think the first thing is, do you remember that you and the other person are both trying to do the same thing, which is change someone else's mind? And I think that's, you're trying to change their mind, but they're also trying to change yours. So I think that's the first thing you have to recognize. We often think about these things as like a one-way street of you telling someone something, but actually it is a two-way street. And I think the other thing that people often try to do around so many topics, and I get it, because we're all so passionate about what we believe, and we wouldn't believe it if we didn't think it was right. So we'll be passionate in defense or, you know, offense about it. But you're not going to change someone's worldview in one conversation. That is really rare. And so I think often we're trying to move someone from a 1 to a 10 on, say, misogyny. It's so hard. Maybe move them from like a 1 to a 2, or maybe to a 3. And then you think about how then you build on that. So rather than being like, today this person is going to declare, I will no longer be misogynistic, you're up against years and sometimes decades of a worldview and a belief system. You're not going to change that in 20 minutes. I mean, you'd have to have the most compelling argument to do that. The thing that I think is what most people should try to do, what I try to do, is just make someone think, question their thinking, and they're free to question mine. But rather than be like, you're wrong, because that's what most people do, you're misogynistic, that comment is like not okay. Maybe it's just, okay, well, why do you think that? And often under explanation, a lot of people don't know why they think what they think. And that's what I found to be quite often. And that to me is where I think you have the most. And I don't want to use the word success because that seems a bit harsh, but if you want to come closer together in an understanding of something, it's about, one, why do we both think the way that we think, understanding the different things that have informed our view, those narratives that are so, so just right there at the front of our minds. And also thinking about the life we've lived that leads us to that point too, and thinking about how do we begin to dismantle those things to maybe see it in a different perspective. But also I think if you go into a conversation only to change someone's mind and never to change your own, I don't think you ever have a successful conversation anyway.
This is it. It's a two-way thing, isn't it? I think often people forget that, don't they? That it is a two-way thing. And another thing you mentioned in your book as well is that often when you get down to it, people aren't necessarily arguing about the same thing. Like how you perceive one topic might not be how the other person perceives that topic as well.
No, if you take a word like woke, like for some people it's a slur, for some people it's a comment, for some people it's a compliment, and I think we have to, when we have a conversation about something that is very passionate, is one, I'm a big fan, and you can be passionate and fiery in your heart, but sometimes dial down the rhetoric, for one. No one wants to be, lectured. And two, even if you think that you are like right, and in the right, and you might be in the right, but when we condemn other people for being in the wrong, like it's never going to be a fruitful conversation. Like that just is, it just doesn't really work that way. So I think we just have to really think about this as a two-way street and understand, even if their view is wrong, understand how they've come to have that view. Because for a lot of people, they've come to have that view. It might just be something that they've always believed because their parents told them, and they've believed it for 40 years now. It's really hard just to rewind time and go, yeah, I've seen the world in a whole wrong way for 40 odd years, and now I'm going to change. So yeah, I think it's just a bit more grace. I think I don't really want to use the word compassion because I don't have compassion for awful views. I genuinely don't. And maybe I don't even have grace for them in a certain sense. But I think when I'm discussing it with someone, I do want to show that person that. And the other thing that I think sometimes the hard line way of discussing things, what I think is, do you actually think this person can even change their mind? Because sometimes the way we're talking to people, actually, I don't believe that you think their mind can be changed. And if it can't be changed, down tools now and just all enjoy your afternoon. I think we have to really think about whether or not we actually believe that we can have an important conversation with someone and they will think differently at the end of it.
Yeah. Okay, totally agree. And when you are presenting the news, or if you are broadcasting something and you have to deal with a particularly difficult or emotional subject, how do you keep your composure during that? It must be quite hard.
I mean, sometimes I've shown emotion. It depends on the context. And I was reading the news, not really. But sometimes if I'm on as a guest and we're talking about something emotional, I don't mind if my voice cracks, obviously not going to start hysterically crying because then I won't be able to say what I want to say. Nothing wrong with emotion. Emotion shows that you care. I think it can be tricky at work with emotion because there's lots going on in your mind. Sometimes I think if I show my emotion now, they're going to think that I'm weak. Or sometimes you don't want your emotions to be manipulated, or for people, you just don't want it to be taken in the wrong kind of a way. So I think it can be trickier at work in that sense. But equally, as long as you can kind of keep talking and kind of keep sharing, I don't think there's anything wrong with showing emotion. And I think it's so interesting that if someone has a happy emotion, no one minds it being shared in a work context. But if someone has a sad or angry emotion, we have a big problem with it. And I think we need to get better at knowing that, look, there's a full complement of human emotions. They're in us all. And at some points they are going to flash out. And at some points it happens at work. And I think the main thing about emotions that we should all try to remember is that they're not used to manipulate people in one way or another. And I think as long as they're not manipulative, then I think you're okay. But I think when you feel that someone is trying to manipulate you by using their emotion, using tears, that's when I think you're in a kind of a dodgy place, dodgy ground. But other than that, I think if it's genuine, if it's true, if it's how you really, really feel, if it's going to help someone understand you better, then I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially in more recent times, the more humanity we can bring to the way we communicate and the more open we are, the more other people are going to understand and feel like there's also someone else that's on their side or going through the same things as them. Because I think a lot of the time we don't remember that people are human and are going through the same things as us. And yeah, it's so important, isn't it, to sort of bring that humanity in.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your upbringing? Your father was a pastor, and I imagine he was a brilliant communicator, and was a huge part of lots of different communities. So how did that influence the way that how did that influence your career?
Yeah, I mean, both my parents are really brilliant communicators. They're different styles. My dad was a preacher, but he was never one of those like fiery firebrand preachers. He really was more of an explainer, storyteller, and very, very persuasive in his communication skills. Very, very persuasive. And he used to sit outside his office and listen to all of his phone calls back when the telly was the telephone was stationary. And I used to listen to a lot of his conversation, how he'd like move people along and like get them to kind of all kind of come on side. So I learned a lot from that. And my mom, I think if I believe as I am, I can be quite a graceful communicator. I get a lot of that from my mom. She was very much, I don't even know how to describe it, very much like a lady. Like she will send you, like my mom will like cut you to size in the nicest way possible. As any mother will, but she's got a lot of grace when she talks. She's also a counselor and psychotherapist. She's got a lot of grace, can do it in a very, very nice way. My dad is nice but more direct, and he will just be a bit more to the point. And so I think I have a bit of a mixture of both of them in that I can lean to tend towards one or the other. I think probably more as I'm getting older, I'm leaning more and more into just the direct because sometimes I just think, listen, I haven't got time to muck around. But I think just watching how they maneuvered through life was, big for me in how I learned to maneuver through life. And my parents raised with a lot of confidence to share our opinions and to speak up. And I think that was also massive for us. So many times I meet so many people, but I meet a lot of people who really struggle to say what they mean and to communicate and to say what they need. Like I remember saying to my mom, I just don't know. And my mom used to say to me, Genelle, you do know, but you don't want to say. And I think a lot of times when people say, I just don't know, they just don't know what to say rather than they don't know, because deep down they know what they want or what they need, but they don't want to say it because either they feel they can't say it in the right way, or it will be rejected, or it won't be accepted. And my parents really raised us just to share our opinions. And for me, I always say to people, I just like the information. Because if I know what you want or need, then I can make an informed decision about whether or not I can or can't do it. But if you don't tell me what you really mean, don't tell me what you need, then this conversation is like on a hiding to nothing, because it's not a useful or a constructive space. And so I think my parents gave me a lot of the confidence to do that, which I think, I don't know, when you meet people, it's, I think, increasingly rare for people to really be vocal and advocate for themselves. But, I think it's something that I wish more people felt confident to do, because they'd be so much happier if they could.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So what would be your top tips for someone who might not feel that confident but wants to advocate for themselves a little bit more?
I think the first thing is always, like in my book, everything, like what I say, is look in first. What do you want? What do you need? And why are you struggling to either ask for it or get it? And I think sometimes we have to just be really honest with ourselves. It's like, you want to talk to a manager, you wait all day to pluck up the courage and you ask them if they're leaving. No, not a good moment. You have to kind of have that thing where you talk to yourself and say, okay, when do I think would be a good time to ask this person something from what I know about them, from what I know about their day? Okay, it's probably not going to be when they first come in. It's probably not going to be when they're leaving, probably not going to be at lunchtime. Okay, how do I think I want to communicate with them? Is it by email? Is it by text? Is it in person? You know, what's the best way to ask? And I think all of these things, if you prepare yourself, and that probably comes the strategy part of me, if you prepare yourself, you give yourself the best chance of success. But if you kind of just wait, mumble something out, it's probably not going to go well. Then that impacts your confidence to have another go. So it's thinking about, how can I set myself up for success in these interactions so that they go well, so that I get more confidence to do it again and to do it better and better. So I think the first thing is always just look in, and I think be clear. So sometimes people are not clear. Like I said earlier, I just want to talk to you. It's not clear. What you want to say is, I would love to talk to you about X, because then that pushes it up on the person's importance, because they have clarity about what it is that you want. You know, if you want to talk to someone, ask them for a 15-minute coffee. Not many people say no to a 15-minute coffee. Say no to an hour-long meeting that they don't know what you want to talk about. Yeah. But a short 15 minutes where you're really clear, look, I want to talk about this, this, and this. I think 15 minutes is enough time. That immediately gives you a greater chance of success. So I think you build your confidence by looking in, what are the ways I'm approaching this? Are they useful? Are they helpful? Is there a better way? And sometimes if you feel confident, there will be someone in your life who you know does this really well. Either bounce ideas off them or ask them for advice about the best way to do it. And that will, I think, will give you greater success.
Definitely. I think there's nothing more scary than your boss saying, we just need to have a quick chat, and them not telling you what it's about beforehand, and then you end up worrying in your head. Yeah, so that's always a nightmare. It sounds like you are incredibly busy all the time. How do you switch off?
You see, and I don't think I'm busy at all. It's insane. One of my friends told me, you're just doing so much. I was like, am I? I play a lot of golf. That's how I switch off. Although golf has now become another outlet for me to analyze data and to think about how to get better. But I would definitely say getting a hobby has changed my life. I was not someone who ever had a hobby. I would just watch telly as a way to let off steam, or read books, sometimes go for a walk, you know, go to the gym. But to me, gym is like a functional part of life, if that makes sense. So I didn't really have anything that was just a passion for me. So taking up golf has helped me to have just like this massive pressure valve. You know, I'm probably going to go later because I've done a few podcasts today, and it will be nice to go onto the golf course, not need my phone, not need anyone to need me, and just really focus on hitting that ball as far as I can, or as short as I can, depending on the distance, and kind of just improving my game. It's outside, it's in nature. You know, the sun's shining today. I've got more vitamin D in the last year than I have probably like the last 5 years, because I spend so much more time outside. But all of those things has given me, I don't know, it's hard to say how much that has cleared away a lot of fog in my mind, and just to also the luxury of giving myself something that's just for me. And I think before I had a hobby, I didn't have anything, and the time spent on the golf course would have felt like such a luxury. I should be doing something productive, you know, something work related. So I think that's probably been the best thing for me. I would say for anyone, to give yourself something that is a luxury. We talk a lot about self-care, but some self-care is functional, like going to the gym, exercising, moving your body, you know, eating well. Those are self-care, but they're functional things. Then I think there is an element of self-care that's luxury. And I think that is giving yourself time to waste time doing something that you love. I think that is like the ultimate luxury self-care.
Yeah, I think it's so important to take yourself completely out of your workaday situation and just go somewhere on your own and just try and focus on something else for a change. I totally agree with that. Yeah. How did you get into golf?
So my old mentor and his wife, Cyril Regis, he sadly passed away, but he and his wife Julia are big golfers, and they were encouraging me to take it up for like a load of reasons. Like for business, golf is great for business and networking and careers, but also, you know, just for a hobby. And I tried to do it, but at the time I was reading the news at ITV Central in the mornings, I just didn't have the energy or the time or the commitment to, because it takes a little while to learn it. But you know, after lockdown, I'd eaten a lot of food from Deliveroo. I was basically sedentary, working from home, didn't know anyone in the area because I just moved. And so Julia was again saying to me, like, you should think about golf. And so I took a few lessons and then went on the course and just became obsessed with it. And it is brilliant for loads of things, and would love to see more women playing golf. Like, that would be brilliant. And playing golf competitively, it's great. It's like, people, we are competitive by nature, human beings are, we just are, but there's not many outlets for being competitive when you're older, like outside of work or maybe board games. But with golf, like, we play competitions every week and you take part because you want to win, and it's an accepted part of taking part of the competition. And I think that's something that's so often missing. It just gives you something else, a little edge, you know, just something to think about. But yeah, they really, you know, and especially Julia over the years has really been like, you know, you should do it, you should do it, you should do it, you should do it. And then finally I did. And I was like, now I get why you've been telling me to do it all this time. And now I'm telling everyone, you should do it, you should do it, you should do it. But yeah, so that's how I got into it.
I love that. And you mentioned as well, it's really great for networking. So how important is networking to you?
I mean, I feel like people always say, you know, your network is your net worth, but it's true. And I think because we say cliches so much, some of the times they become like almost you don't almost see it anymore, if that makes sense, and see what you're talking about. But I think, you know, there's been times when I don't know what I want to do. I've left a job, or I don't have a job, or I need something, and the ability to pick up the phone or to drop an email to someone and say, look, I'm looking for some work, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. Even if, you know, putting on an event, I need this speaker, I need this person, the ability to have a network of people that you can put that email out to, you can put that text out to, that will do you a favor, that you can do a favor for. I cannot overstate how much everybody needs that. And I know some people say that, oh, I don't like networking. For me, I think the biggest misconception about networking is it's you just asking for things. I think the thing about networking is a reciprocal relationship. And even if you feel someone's more important than you, I think it's about thinking, what do I have to offer them? Because someone might have a network that's like up here with everyone like up at a 10, but sometimes they need people who are maybe at like a 4 or a 5, and they don't naturally have that in their networking circle. But you might be that person in the networking circle who has access to a different space, community, set of skills than that other person does. And so for me, that's the brilliant thing. If we approach networking right, that it's not just always about what you need, it's also about what you have to give. And that can be at any level. So for me, I have always, and because I've wanted to actually, because I vibe with people or I don't vibe with people. I can't force it. But I've always kept friends from nearly every single job I've ever had. Even if I didn't enjoy the job, even if it didn't go well, I've always retained some people from that sector, from that workplace. And, you know, they become part of your ether, you become part of theirs. And so when you need something, when they need something, it makes it easier. So I've just found it invaluable. When you need something, I know that, you know, if I say, okay, right, I want to get back on telly, or I want to do this, or I want to access that particular place, there's someone in my network that will be able to help me to do that. And I think everybody needs that.
Yeah, and I love that you found fun ways to do it as well. Like, it doesn't need to be a crusty old thing where people are wearing suits with a warm glass of wine, does it? Like, you can go out and play golf. There's so many different ways that you can develop your network. So I love that you found your way that works for you. Okay, so I've got 3 questions I'm asking everybody at the end of each of their interviews. The first one is, what is one piece of advice you wish you would have had at the start of your career?
Hold on to your confidence very tightly. I think when you start your career, you're full of like beans and confidence, and then people say, oh, this is really hard, and oh no, it's not going to go like this. And, you know, you meet some mean people, you meet some terrible managers, you meet some bad colleagues, and I think it can knock your confidence and make you wonder if you are as good as you think you are, if you can do it. So I think I would just say, hold on to your confidence so tightly. Even when things don't go well, it doesn't mean that you're bad, it just means situations bad, and if you are bad, you can improve. So just hold on to the confidence.
Love that. Okay, and what's one book, talk, or podcast that's really inspired you?
Oh gosh, so many. I think The Four Agreements is a brilliant book by by, I can't remember his name now, but The Four Agreements, I think is a brilliant book. And that's a book that really shifted my mindset. I think I enjoy books that are a lot about personal responsibility. I don't know, like, and not just personal responsibility, but also personal agency. So you actually have the responsibility, but you also have the power to kind of change your outlook on life and to change situation. But the Four Agreements, I think it's mean what you say, always try your best, don't take things personally. And I think that was the biggest thing for me that kind of was a massive perception shift. Don't take things personally. I used to take everything personally. Some things are personal, but a lot of things aren't. A lot of things are other people's projections, and we're also projecting onto other people all the time. And when you don't take things personally, a lot of life becomes much easier.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's never normally about you, is it? Whatever anyone comes to you with, it's usually something that's going on with their life or something that's put them in a mood. Totally agree. Okay, and who is one person who's really inspired you on your career?
I'm probably going to say my parents, and it sounds so cheesy, like my parents. My parents both came to England as children. My dad was a teenager, my mum was like 7. And to see what they've achieved and what they've built up and how they're respected, how they're loved, how they're known for being honest, truthful, speaking their minds, but, you know, doing good work. I think that has been a massive inspiration for me, because I think growing up here and being born here, we have incredible amounts of entitlement. Like, even if you think people don't, you grow up being born here with like, well, I deserve this, and these are my rights, and this is what I should have, and this is how it should be, and this is how people should treat me, because that's the way the culture is. But when I think that you can come here with that not in your mind, in a whole different time when society was really not welcoming, and to manage to stay together, stay married, and build all of those things in a professional capacity, and also grow personally as people, I think that's massively inspiring to me, that it can be done.
Yeah, they sound like really inspirational people. That's lovely. Okay, Genelle, if people want to find out any more about you, where can they find you?
So I'm at genellealdred.com. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Genelle Aldred, because there's not many Genelle Aldreds in the world. I think there's only another one, so you'll find me. And then also I've started my Substack, and I need to publish to it more. So if people find me there, then I will write more things. But yeah, and then of course my book's in many bookstores, including Amazon, which is probably easy, but it's in many bookstores. So yeah.
Cool. So we need to pile on the pressure for the Substack for you. Great. Genelle, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time you spent with me. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.